What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we dive into 5 budget brews for the new set Streets of New Capenna here in MTG. Each of these decks are based on the themes of the families with the new set, so I tried my best to keep the budget low and also keep the theme of what each family represents in each of the decks. It was definitely a challenge, but with that being said, let's just dive into the decks and let's just talk about them. So, unfortunately, I did not have early access to the event, so I'm actually not able to put them into MTG Arena and play test them out before making the decks. But I tried my best to keep the themes of each of the families together, and I'm going to show you my listings that I'll have linked down in the description below if you want to import these decks and try them out and make your own changes based on how they play in your opinion. But these are the list I have, and the first family up is the Cabaretti family, the Naya family, I would say. Their colors are red, green, and white. And I try my best to kind of keep that color scheme as close as possible with that. There are some old cards that I kind of threw in that I felt like would work very well with this style of deck. As well as like there are a lot of the new cards for the most part in this deck. I tried my best to kind of keep the theme of the set in the essence of what the deck is made of. So the first card up is we have the Brazen Upstart. It is a 4/2 with vigilance that when it dies, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature card from among them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order, so helping you keep your hand full, being able to keep on playing creatures. For 3 mana, not bad for a 4/2 that also has vigilance, so definitely a pretty awesome card. Next card up after that is Ginny Faye, Jameer second. I feel like she is kind of like the Cabaretti, leader of the set. She is a 3/3 for 3 mana. You can either play all green, you play a red, green, and a white. You could pay 2 green and a white or a red. The combination is pretty much endless with her, but what she does here is that whenever you create one or more tokens, you may instead create that many 2/2 green cat creature tokens with haste, or that many 3/1 dog creature tokens with vigilance. So definitely an interesting creature. And she's definitely one of those things where we're trying to theme the deck, besides maybe like the first card around for the most part, trying our best to create as many tokens on the battlefield as possible to hopefully convert them into cats or dogs, depending on the situation and what we're playing against. Then from there, we have Gala Greeters. Definitely an interesting card. It's a 2 mana 1/1 with the ability of Alliance, which triggers very well with us producing counters. And then whenever a creature would enter the battlefield under control, we can choose one of the abilities that haven't been chosen this turn, which is put a +1/+1 counter on it, create a tapped treasure token, which then triggers with the Ginny Faye, or gain 2 life. So depending on how well and how rampy we can get, we could possibly do all 3 in one single turn. Definitely pretty awesome nonetheless. And the treasure token actually kind of will make this ability trigger twice if we are able to convert it into a cat or a dog token. So definitely awesome there, and a little bit of synergy. Then we have up the Prosperous Innkeeper. Definitely, I think, a solid card for a deck like this. When it makes a token, when it comes into the battlefield, which yet again triggers very well with Ginny Faye. Another thing too is going to help us gain life every time we have a creature enter the battlefield, which is definitely very awesome in a deck like this. Gaining life is definitely a good way to kind of mitigate some damage that we may take early on as we're trying to set up our little combo that we got going on here. So definitely a pretty awesome card. Then I have Maja, the Brigaded Protector. Yet again, a card that I feel like doesn't see a lot of play, but it's a card that creates tokens whenever a land enters the battlefield under control. It creates a 1/1 white human creature warrior token, and it's a 2/3 for 5 mana. A little expensive. It's kind of like our big creature in the deck, but it also gives our other creatures we control +1/+1. So kind of like a little glorious anthem effect of sorts for our creatures. And I only have 2 copies because it is legendary and it's kind of expensive. But I felt like it was kind of an interesting card to kind of mess around with, especially in budget form. Helping us create some additional tokens, so definitely pretty awesome there. Then Battlecry Goblin makes the cut. Interesting card yet again. Something that I may want to shift around, but I thought it was kind of interesting here for the 2 mana +1/+0 to creatures. Well, it says goblins. Maybe I should actually change that. I thought it said creatures, so that's something I missed. But I actually thought the pack tactics was kind of where I was going with this, because if we attack with whenever Battlecry Goblin attacks, if we attack creatures of power of 6 or greater, it creates a 1/1 red goblin creature token, tapped and also attacking. So that's why I thought maybe we could trigger some additional tokens. But now looking at it and now realizing that the first ability for 2 mana is only goblins, I may want to shift that out. So if the list looks a little bit differently when you see it, it's because I would probably replace it with something else. But nonetheless, definitely an interesting card, even for the secondary ability, even if the first one doesn't work out too well. Then we have Usher the Fallen, and it's a 1-mana 2/1, definitely a strong card. A card you see in mono white all the time, and I actually think the boast ability is actually very good in this deck, just because it will help us push additional tokens out, especially for 2 mana is not that bad every time this creature does attack, making it a threat and making it something our opponent wants to stop, and preventing us from creating additional tokens. The Clarion Spirit, the deck isn't on the expensive side. There's probably times where we can play multiple spells on the same turn, and whenever we cast our second spell each turn, we get a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. Yet again, synergizing very well with what we got going on here. So definitely a good card that helps us create some tokens if we can multi-spell in the single turn. Then we have Chaplain of the Alms. It's a 1-mana 1/1, I believe, with or 2/1, 1/1. The other side's a 2/1. First striker with ward 1, so it costs 1 additional mana to actually target with a spell, and then we can disturb it for 4 mana, and we get a 2/1 that gives all our creatures ward of 1. And that's actually kind of where I thought maybe I would go with this. Just looking for a cheap creature. I was looking to kind of fill up my 1-drops in this deck, and just kind of make sure we have possibly a chance of having a turn 1 play other than Usher the Fallen. And I thought having 2 copies of this is probably more than enough, and if we get the other side, it will help us produce ward on maybe our other creatures, so our opponent has to either wipe all the board or have to pay that additional 1 mana to actually target our creature with a ward ability. Then we have Cabaretti Charm. This is kind of an interesting card for a token style deck, and I think it fits very, very well what we're trying to do. It deals damage equal to the number of creatures we control to target creature or planeswalker, so a little bit of removal, +1/+1, trample, and until end of turn, so kind of like a way to get a little bit over the top damage, especially if we get very wide against our opponent. And then we create 2 1/1 green white citizen creature tokens, yet again helping us maybe ramp out a couple dogs, couple cats, depending on the game situation and what we're trying to wrap up there. Then I included Patch Up as a card, as other than our Maja Brigaded Protector. This will help us get back any creature that ends up in the graveyard back onto the battlefield, which is definitely awesome, as we can return up to 3 target creatures with mana value 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. So we can do 1 creature at 3, 1 creature at 1 and 2, or 3 1-cost creatures. So definitely a card that's going to help us, recover maybe possibly from a board wipe of sorts. Then I included the Big Score, as it's a way to kind of dig a little bit deeper. Definitely a good draw mechanic, and also produces tokens yet again with itself. So yet again, something we can also do with Ginny Faye, get additional tokens at instant speed instead of the 2 treasure tokens. But as additional cost to cast a spell, we discard a card, and then we draw 2 cards and create 2 treasure tokens. So a little bit of a draw spell at 4 mana. Then we got Join the Dance. Of course, I feel like this is definitely a card that works very, very well in this deck. For 2 mana at sorcery speed, we create 2 1/1 human creature tokens, and we can flash it back for 5 mana to do it all over again. Definitely synergizes very well what we're trying to do. Plus, they're also citizens, now that I'm realized are the human creatures. Never mind, not citizens. I thought they were citizens for a second, but definitely very awesome there. And then I also got, you see, a pair of goblins, just as a little card that creates some additional tokens at instant speed that we can do at end of turn, as it creates 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Or if we want to kind of get that additional push of damage in, for 3 mana we can give each of our creatures +2/+0 until end of turn. So if we get very wide, the opponent can block a couple creatures, but if we get that additional +2/+0 on those additional creatures that aren't blocked, maybe we can finish off our opponent that way. And it's for 3 mana, definitely a very versatile card based on this situation on the board. And then for the mana base, is something that it's still very tricky, especially for 3 colors in a deck that is a little bit rough on trying to get out as quickly as possible. I actually included the pathways in this deck. I didn't include them in the other ones because I was very unsure of if you get pathways in the starter decks and what color schemes you get when in those pathways that you do get possibly with the starter decks. So this one I do have the pathways in, but if you don't have the pathways, as I may have gotten the wrong pathways, I would say just maybe add in the tap lands that either you gain a life, you either have the one that's the snow one or whatever. I would say those are also decent replacement if you also feel like you're not getting the right color mana. But for the most part, I went with the Cabaretti Courtyard, which helps us dig into our deck, find a mountain, forest, or plains, put on the battlefield tapped, and then we gain a life. And then we have just 1 of each pathway, and then we have 6, 6, and 5 as our breakdown of a deck. It's about a 50-50 split with green and white, and then a little splash of red, so I don't think the red is as necessary, but it's definitely something that we want to make sure we have, as there's a couple cards in the casting cost that we need a red mana to actually cast. But nonetheless, I do think this is definitely an interesting deck, and I can't wait to try it out tomorrow once it releases and kind of see how the deck plays out. when I actually get some games in with it. All right, next deck up on the list is going to be the can't think of the name off the top of my head. The next deck up on the list is going to be the Brokers deck. This is definitely the Bant deck of the families, and it's definitely a deck that's kind of interesting to play. And I do think there's probably a couple cards I probably could have added that I'm now thinking that I think you get one of them at least, a Clarion, not a Clarion Spirit, the 2-mana guy that puts +1/+1 counters on creatures, and I think that's definitely something that could fit in this deck, but I didn't include it, as yet again, I don't have the starter decks on my main account. I deleted them, so I don't really know what cards are included in the starter decks, and I unfortunately, I'm recording this late, so I didn't have time to reference by looking online and kind of seeing what starter deck it would include. But this is a Bant deck. The goal of the deck is to kind of get, yet again, like the last deck, it's kind of get like wide, but we're also trying our best to put +1/+1 counters on things, and that's kind of what we're trying to do here. So we want to be aggressive, but we also want to get wide as possible. So we have Usher the Fallen because it's a very solid 1-drop, creates tokens for 2 mana with Boast, and overall very solid card. Up after that, we have Jaspera Sentinel. It's a 1/2 for 1 with reach. Tapping mana to kind of help us ramp up, fix maybe our colors, depending on what we end up with. If we're different color short, or we need that additional blue, white, or green, we can definitely tap this, get that, and also has reach, so it's definitely good in chump block in there. Then we have Gala Greeters, yet again another card that fits very well in any deck that splashes green, I think, just because it's a 2-mana 1/1 that just benefits from us playing other creatures by putting +1/+1 counter on it, creating a tap treasure token, which we can use to ramp, or gaining 2 life, so definitely good all around. We have Make It Disappear in here. I thought it was a little bit of a counterspell, a little disruption in the early game if we want to try to play a tempo matchup. With Casualty 1, we can sacrifice one of our tokens that we create with like one of our creatures, one of our creature tokens, and then we can counter target spell unless its controller pays 2 mana. If we copy it by sacrificing to Casualty, we can then create additional copy to then also counter that same spell. Then they have to technically pay 4 for it. So definitely kind of something I want to mess around with in this deck instead of like a Jawari Disruption. I'll just kind of see how it plays out for a 2-mana counter spell. This is probably going to be the replacement, I think, for Jawari in the future once it rotates. But definitely a card that I want to see how it plays out, especially early with the set release. Now going back up into the 2-drop slot, we have Backstreet Bruiser. This is a card that benefits from us when we have 2 or more counters among creatures we control. It doesn't. It can attack as though it didn't have Defender, so it's a card that loses Defender, and it's a 3/3 for 3, so definitely a good little blocker for 2 mana. And we do have cards that put counters on things. It doesn't seem like it immediately, but there are some things in the deck. But definitely a 2-mana 3/3. Regardless of it being a defender, is not that bad. We also have Clarion Spirit. Yet again, the deck's not super expensive. I think the highest drop is 3, so most of the deck is fairly cheap. So if we draw a lot of our mana, we can possibly second spell multiple times over the course of the game. It's definitely a good way to pump out additional creatures. And I also threw some Kabira takedowns in the deck, as this is a deck that can get very wide with very small creatures, but we can, deal damage equal to the number of creatures we control to target creature or planeswalker. So overall, very good there. Then we got Broker's Ascendancy. It's a 3-mana enchantment at the beginning of our end step. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control and a loyalty counter on each planeswalker we control. We don't have a planeswalker in the deck, but the idea of putting +1/+1 counters on things when we're not playing the 2-drop thing that puts +1/+1 counters on things, this is definitely very good, and it puts it on everything, which is definitely awesome, though it's at end step, so we can't use it for our initial combat, but yet again, it's still a very, very good card. Then we have the Broker's Charm here. It's 3 mana, the Broker colors or Bant colors. Target creature control, we get +1/+0 on a turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker and opponent control. So a little bit of like a fight spell that deals damage. Destroy target enchantment and draw 2 cards. I know I'm kind of blocking it, but there we go. And then draw 2 cards at instant speed. So definitely not a bad card. Definitely a card that is definitely, I think, pretty decent, pretty versatile. If Naya enchantment is still a thing, we have a way to get rid of our opponent's enchantment. Then after that, it's a Disciple Duelist. It's a 3-mana 3/1 or 2/1 that has double strike and enters the battlefield with a shield counter on it. That was something cool to try out. Double Striker for 3 mana. 2/1 is not great, but it does have that shield counter on it. And then if we can have like a Broker's Ascendancy out, it can get stronger and stronger, and this becomes our big creature that our opponent has to block, or they're going to get dealt chunks of damage. And then we go into Ligella Magpie. Enters battlefield, exile any number of target creatures an opponent controls by different players until it leaves the battlefield. When an exile card enters the battlefield under under your control this way. Put a 2+1/+1 counters on it, so definitely interesting. So it's interesting in a sense that it's kind of like a little bit of a spot removal spell, because we can also exile one of our opponent's creatures, and definitely get it out of our way. Though I think this is kind of weird wording. It makes it sound like you do multiple creatures, but I think it's kind of like worded for like commander in a sense. So it's, I think if you have 3 other opponents because you're playing commander, you can do 1 on each creature. But definitely an interesting card for a 2/3 for 3 mana. That's kind of like that little bit of like a little bit of terrible with names tonight. Like an aspirant, but built into like a Bant creature, so overall pretty decent there. And yet again, I included Patch Up here, as this is a card I feel like that will, especially in these smaller decks where you have a lot of small creatures, is definitely a card that's going to see play. 3 mana sorcery that returns up to 3 target creature. Cards with mana value 3 or less from graveyard to the battlefield. Overall, I think a very solid card that makes a lot of sense for this style of a deck that we're just trying to get as much on the battlefield as possible and try to deal as much damage as quickly as possible with all our little small creatures and grow them in the process. Then moving on to the lands, this is where I didn't include the pathways, or where I started not including the pathways, and we kind of went with like the Blossom and Sands and the lands that come in the battlefield tapped, and we gain a life in the process. The one downfall to playing like these type of lands is that they do come in the battlefield tapped. We gain a life, but it kind of slows us down from kind of like doing what we want to do. So we have 4 copies of that. We have 4 copies of the Broker's Hideout to help us fix our mana. We have, I believe, 4 forests, 4 plains, and I think we have 4 forests, 4 islands, and 5 plains, and 3 Thorn Falls. As I think white is kind of like the majority color here, as our split is 24, 18, 17, so that's why I include the 1 additional. But overall, very interesting mana base, and yet again, if you have pathways of any of these color combinations, I would say definitely add them, because having less tap mana is always a good thing. And then from there, you can always maybe invest in the new triomes, or the new 3 color lands, I should say. They're not technically triomes, but definitely overall very interesting deck. Yet again, can't wait to kind of play with it and kind of mess around with it and kind of see what I can do to, maybe make it a little bit better. Once I am able to play the deck and kind of mess around and kind of see what's working and what's not working. But with that being said, let's move on to the next deck. All right, the next deck up on the list is going to be Obscura. This is the Esper family with the white, the black, and the blue. Overall, very interesting deck with what it's trying to do. I think the main ability here is Conceive, I believe, or I could be wrong. Or connives. If I could say words, is connive is kind of like what Obscura is trying to do. And a lot of the goal of the deck is to kind of convive, to kind of make our creatures bigger, by also letting us draw cards and getting rid of cards in our hand that may not be useful. But overall, very interesting deck. So we have 3 copies of the Hypnotic Rifter. It's a 1 mana, 1/2. That for 3 mana we can connive with it, and we draw a card, discard a card. If we discarded a non-land card, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Definitely a decent, solid 1-drop that I think can get, is a good way to kind of dig a little bit deeper if we have some open mana, and kind of get rid of what we don't want. Then we have Grizzly Sigil, a very interesting removal spell here. 2-star creature or planeswalker. If it was dealt non-combat damage this turn, it deals 3 damage to it and you gain 3 life. Otherwise, it deals 1 damage to it and you gain 1 life. You can use Casualty here to copy it and do it again. Definitely an interesting card that I'm now looking at it, and I feel like it doesn't fit in this deck because Casualty is not really something this deck's going to do, or for the most part. So I may take that out and may put a different 1-drop or a different spot removal spell in it. Plus, we're not going to do a lot of non-combat damage now that I'm realizing here as well. So definitely a card that doesn't really, get to that 3 damage and 3 life thing that often. So definitely a card that I messed up on. Then we added in Bloodchief Thirst, as I feel like there's going to be a lot of planeswalkers floating about, as well as, a bunch of creatures. And for 1 mana, spot removal spell that destroys target creature, planeswalker, converted mana cost 2 or less, and we can kick it for 4 mana and do anything that is any chaos for that pretty good. I chose the Silver Heroes Downfall because it's cheaper, but you can also play Heroes Downfall if you have one of those. I also added in some eye twitches here because of the learn ability. I have Environmental Sciences and some other situational things in the sideboard with the lessons, and I do think it will help us as well. With that, Plus, it's a very interesting card, regardless, because the learn ability is also pretty awesome as well, because you can also draw a card and discard a card. I think that actually triggers very well with some of the cards in Connives, just because I think some of that stuff does trigger when we discard a non-creature card, and I don't think it has to be for that particular card, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, draw a card, discard a card. If you discard a non-land card, but I'm not 100% sure how that interaction works. If it does work that way, then it's definitely an awesome win. If it doesn't, it's okay. I think this will still help us fix our mana, because we can get something like an Environmental Sciences in case we're struggling. Then we have Tainted Indulgence. It's a 2-mana instant speed spell that we draw 2 cards, discard a card unless there are 5 more mana values among cards in our graveyard. I don't know if this deck is going to get to 5 different mana values, as I think it's the most expensive card is maybe 5 mana, but I don't think we have a bunch of, various land spells over like a lot of things. I think that secondary ability is going to be more so for like anyone who's trying to like mill and maybe reanimate. But I do think for 2 mana to get a draw 2 and discard 1 is actually not a bad thing regardless. So I did add 4 copies of that, as I think it's a very good card, regardless of if you're going to be able to get the the 5 different mana values in your graveyard. Then I actually added in 4 copies of Raffine's Informant. It's a 2-mana 2/1 that enters the battlefield. It connives. We draw a card, discard a card. We discard a non-land card this way, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, so it's a 2/1 with the possibility of becoming a 3/2 for 2 mana. Definitely, I think, pretty decent as well. Just Warrior Disruption, just a couple of those for 2 mana, and also counts as a blue mana source in case we need it. Infernal Grasp has some spot removal. Then we have Obscura Charm, the new charm for the Esper colors. We have return target multicolor permanent with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Counter target instant or sorcery spell, or destroy target creature or planeswalker mana value 3 or less. So you get more removal, possibility of reanimating in case there's something we want to get back, or we can counter something if they're playing some sort of big spell, and we this is like our counter spell in this deck. Then after that we have Nimble Larcenist. It's a 3-mana 2/1 with flying that when it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose an artifact, instant, or sorcery card from it and exile that card. So just a little bit of spot removal, so definitely very good. And it's a 2/1 flyer, which is definitely awesome as well, that you still get a little bit of damage, or you get a creature out of that with a little bit of damage. Plus the card you make them discard essentially is now exiled instead of going to the graveyard, so they can't get it back if they have a way to get it back. So definitely a pretty awesome card there. Then we have the Obscura Interceptor. It's a flash card. This is kind of, I think, the 4 of in the deck that I included. It's kind of like a counter spell, or it's like a bounce counter spell kind of thing. Kind of like the Kraken in a sense. It's a 4-mana 3/1 with flash and lifelink, and when it enters the battlefield, it connives. When it connives this way, return up to 1 target spell to its owner's hand. So the connive ability actually bounces a spell back to your opponent's hand, allowing us to also get a +1/+1 counter on it. It doesn't say it here because it decided to choose the alternate art, which I guess in the alternate art doesn't include the little text to let you know about the ability. But essentially, it could become a 4/2 for 4 mana, so definitely not a bad thing with a bounce effect built into it. And then we have Quesna of Augur Agonies, and this card's pretty interesting. It's a 3/4 for 4 mana as well. And then whenever we draw a card, target opponent loses 1 life, and we gain 1 life. So definitely an interesting thing, and with Connive to kind of have like a card that kind of trains our opponent when we're conniving. So overall, very interesting here. It's not very big, but I do think the drain ability could become very problemsome for our opponent in the late game, just because if they start getting low on health, we could finish them out with a bunch of different card draw effects, which would definitely help out. And I think it triggers each card we draw, so it's not just for one card. So every time we draw a card, for each card they'll lose 1 life and we'll gain 1 life. So we'll, for our 2 mana draw 2, I think they'll lose 2 and we gain 2. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, but that's how it is worded to me. I probably should look it up, or once I playtest tomorrow, I'll really see how it works out. But definitely overall pretty decent card for our deck that we're trying to get the connive ability kind of working there. And then the mana base is yet again pretty straightforward. We have a couple Dismal Backwaters. We have 5 islands. We have 4 storefronts to help us find our colors in case we're lacking a particular color. We have 4 plains. We have 2 Scoured Barrens, 5 swamps, and we have 2 Tranquil Coves, giving us 24 total mana. In lands, and then we also have the 2 Jwari Disruptions as additional blue mana in case we need more blue. So overall, very interesting deck, and here's just a quick little glimpse at the lesson board. Like I said, we got Environmental Sciences, Necrotic Fumes, a Reduced to Memory, 2 Prophecies, and 1 Introduction to Annihilation. So a little bit of a mixed bag of stuff depending on what the situation is. Though we don't play too many eye twitches, but yet again, this is here in case we do draw an eye twitch and it ends up dying. We get that ability to get any of these cards depending on the board situation. All right, next deck up is the Riveteers budget deck that I made up, and Riveteers are the Jund colors. Definitely a very interesting deck on what it's trying to do. It's a little bit of like the mob bossy style deck with some of the flavor of some of the cards in the actual color. A lot of things are a little bit more like mobster-y for the most part. But here, the idea here is a little bit of sacrifice, a little bit of blitz is kind of what is going to help with the deck and kind of make things kind of work overall. And, you know, this is definitely a pretty decent like board. I think I kind of put together with not using a lot of the rares and mythics of the set, which I think definitely will make this deck a lot better. I think there's 4 rares in total in the deck, and they're kind of spread out between 2 different cards. But you know, yet again, I have Bloodthirsty Thirst in the deck just because, yet again, Planeswalkers will probably be a thing. And just having an ability to remove a Planeswalker from even 4 mana is not that bad, and also does creatures for 1 mana at mana value 2 or less. Couple Play of Fires in case we want to get that additional spot removal, or we want to deal damage to opponent's face in case we want to burn them out. Then we have the Riveteers Requisitioner. It's a 2 mana 3/1 that whenever it dies, we can create a treasure token, and then we can also blitz it for 3 with the ability here that it gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card and sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So a little bit of that, like a little bit aggressive, like, hey, I'm gonna just go all out and sacrifice in the process of trying to do damage to you. They have Tenacious Underdog, yet again another very interesting card here that I think is going to be very, very good, and you're going to see a lot of play with it just because of how good it is. But it is a 2 mana 3/2 with the blitz ability of 4 mana, pay 2 life. You may cast Tenacious Underdog from your graveyard using its blitz ability, so this is kind of a card that even if they get rid of it, it can come back by blitzing it again. They'll have to exile it from your graveyard in order to not have you recast it. So overall, very strong card, and a 2 mana 3/2 is definitely very good. Then going to the true mana drop slot, we have 3 copies of Infernal Grasp. Destroy target creature, you lose 2 life for instant speed mana. We have Body Dropper in here. This kind of combos very well with the Blitz ability, because whenever we sacrifice another creature, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Body Dropper. For 2 mana, a black and a red, sacrifice another creature, Body Dropper gains menace on a turn, making it a little bit harder to block, especially once it starts getting bigger. Definitely a very strong card, I think, for 2 mana, and it being a 2 mana 2/2 with an ability that can make it get stronger, and with combo with Blitz, definitely could be a very, very good card nonetheless. And then we got Riveteers Charm. It's 3 mana, Jund colors, sacrifice a Soul Shatter with the first ability. With opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker they control with the highest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. The second ability is we exile top 3 cards of our library until your next step. We may play those cards, so a little bit dig deeper. And then the third step is that we can choose is exile target player's graveyard. So in case our opponent's playing some sort of reanimator deck, we can target their graveyard, get rid of the cards in the graveyard, and then they can't use them anymore. After that, we have the Crew Captain. It's a Jund color creature that has haste, and it's indestructible as long as it enters the battlefield this turn. So if we play it on turn 3, we can swing it for 4 immediately, and also is indestructible, so they can block. But even if they block for the 2 toughness, this creature will still live and it'll be around for the next turn unless they have some sort of removal to get rid of it by the time our turn goes around again. Then after that, we have the Zarada's Envoy. This is kind of like one of the mob bossy looking characters. It's a 5/4 trampler for 4 mana. When it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of your library. You may play a land card, or you may play a land card from the top of your library, or cast a spell with a mana value less than or equal to the damage dealt from the top of your library without paying its mana cost. If you don't, put the card into your hand instead. So a card that's built with a little bit of a draw effect, and if you can, it has trample, so even if they block, but they don't block a lot, you can maybe cast a spell that is the difference of damage that this creature's dealt. Worst case scenario, it's just a 5/4 trampler. But definitely a cool ability, and it also has Blitz, so plays well with kind of like our sacrifice effect there, which you get a draw card out of. So if you want to be a little bit aggressive, you can Blitz in with it, though it's not any different of a discount. It's actually more expensive at two colorless and 1 of each color. So definitely very interesting how you want to play with it, but definitely a cool card nonetheless. Definitely pretty awesome little little ability there. Then we got Mr. Othello of the Boulder. It's a 4 mana 2/4 that whenever we attack, we double target creature's power in a turn. Yet again, definitely a very underestimated ability in the sense that, you know, a lot of our creatures aren't the biggest, but if we have this and we make our creature's power that much better, say like combine that with the crew captain, our crew captain comes in immediately, attacks in for 8 damage. So it's definitely one of those things, and has indestructible. Like our opponent then is really forced to chump block it regardless. So definitely pretty awesome. Also combine that with you know, the envoy, definitely a cool little combo there, getting that little bit of additional damage. Then we have Jaxis the Troublemaker. It's a 4 mana 2/3 that for 1 mana we discard a card, we create a treasure token that's a copy. Create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, and then when this creature dies, you draw a card, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next player's end step. So essentially, a card that gives like a creature we make a copy of a blitz ability in a sense, and then we sacrifice it regardless. And we can blitz it as well for 2 mana, which we can attack, or we can use its ability immediately if we want to copy something to get that additional damage, because the creature has haste, and then it gets sacrificed at the end of our combat or whatever, at the end of our turn. So definitely an interesting card that I want to mess around with and kind of see what it can do. Definitely a little bit, I think, underestimated, because people see this and they see a 2 mana or 4 mana 2/3, which doesn't seem too impressive, doesn't have haste. But I think the 2 mana blitz ability is going to be like the sneaky thing that people aren't going to expect. And the last card in the deck is the Forge Boss. It's a 4 mana 3/4 that when we sacrifice one or more other creatures, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. This ability only triggers only once each turn. So this is yet again another card that I think synergizes very well with the Blitz ability. Yet again, combines very well with like the Jaxis, in the sense that whatever creature that we copy with this will get sacrificed, triggering this ability. So definitely pretty awesome there. Overall, very interesting body of the deck, and then the mana base yet again. Like the last deck, we have 3 copies of Bloodfilled Caves, we have 4 copies of the Forest, we have 3 copies of the Jungle Hollow, we have 5 mountains, we have 3 highlands, and we have 5 swamps. A little bit more of a balanced mana base, as the mana base is, you know, a little bit more split. I think it's a little bit more black and red with a splash of green, I would say. There's more black and red cards, and then there's like probably like it's probably like, you know, it's probably like a 2 to 1 ratio when it comes to cards with those mana values in the deck. But definitely overall good deck. I think interesting deck, and yet again a deck I want to try out and kind of see how it plays, as I do think this deck does have potential, especially when you start getting into the rares and mythics of the set that kind of also work very well with this kind of synergy. But yet again, definitely a good starting point, I think, regardless. All right, the next deck up is the Maestros deck. And the way I kind of did this one is like, actually, Maestros is definitely a very interesting combo, as I think there's multiple ways you can go with it. And a lot of the cards I was reading that kind of caught my eye were a little bit more on the vampire side. And these, I feel like, were actually the very few vampire cards in the whole set. And, you know, it's definitely a very interesting deck. So it has a lot of the older cards, a lot of the older vampires from like Crimson Vow and stuff. So if it looks like it's a mixture of Crimson Vow and the new set, it definitely is. But, you know, we have Grizzly Sigil in here because I think Vampires has a good way of dealing that excess damage to possibly get that 3/3. And then we can always sacrifice a creature that's 1 power or greater to copy the spell and do it multiple times. We got the Epicure card that deals that 1 damage of non-combat damage. We also created Blood Token that helps us draw a little bit deeper. We have the Blood Fountain, 1 mana, you know, artifact that creates a blood token, and then we can tap 4 mana, sacrifice it, return up to 2 target creature cards from our graveyard to our hand. So some recursion's always very good for the deck. We got Blood Tithe Harvester, enters the battlefield, create a blood token, sacrifice Blood Tithe Harvester, create a target creature, it's -X, where X is twice the number of blood tokens we control, activate it only as a sorcery. So a little bit of spot removal built into the creature. Also, it's a 3/2 for 2 mana, definitely very good there. Then we have Vampire Socialite. It's a 2 mana 2/2 that with Menace that enters battlefield. If the opponent lost life this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each other vampire control, so it makes our vampire stronger. As long as an opponent lost life this turn, each other vampire control enters the battlefield with additional +1/+1 counter on it, so making our future vampires stronger, also making any vampire that's currently in the battlefield stronger as we play this like in our second main phase after combat. Then yet again, we have Tainted Indulgence. A card that I think I'm going to see a lot of in decks that play blue and black, just because 2 mana draw 2 and you discard a card is not always the worst thing. And if you get the 5 mana value symbols, you don't have to discard a card and you just a 2 mana draw 2 at instant speed. Definitely pretty awesome there. We have the Maestros Charm. It's a 3 mana. Look at top half cards of our library. We get to put one of those cards into our hand, the rest into our graveyard. Each opponent loses 3 life. We gain 3 life. Maestros Charm deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker. So a card that is very versatile. Kind of does a little bit this, a little bit that. Make your opponent, Lightning Helix built into it. Big damage for 3 mana to a target creature or planeswalker. And maybe if you want to dig a little bit deeper and look for a particular card or answer, we can always do that for 3 mana as well. And then we have the Maestros Abolitionist Diabloist is I think that we would call it. It's a 3 mana 1/4 with Death Touch and Haste. When it attacks, if you don't control a devil token, create a tap attacking 1/1 red devil creature token that when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. Yet again, another creature that will help us get that damage, not non-combat damage in, with the devil tokens. And itself is a 1/4 Death Toucher. Definitely something in the early game that is a little bit hard to block. Maybe our opponent doesn't want to lose a big creature. To a 1/4, and also as haste, so can attack it immediately. So it's like we're pushing that additional damage in on turn 3. Then we have Vampire's Vengeance, because we are playing a vampire theme deck, and just in case we get matched up against decks that are playing a lot of small creatures, it deals 2 damage to each non-vampire creature. We create a blood token for 3 mana, instant speed. So a little bit of board removal in the deck. Definitely something I thought to just mess around with, yet again, to kind of see where the meta kind of goes. Maybe this is definitely a card if you're playing vampires to kind of add. And then we have Syndicate Infiltrator. It's a 4 mana 3/3 that has flying, and as long as there are 5 or more mana values among cards in your graveyard, it gets +2/+2, so it can be a 4 mana 5/5 flyer. It's kind of like what I was seeing. Yet again, very hard to find a lot of vampires that are actually from the set that aren't multicolored, as it didn't seem like there were many that were single color vampires in the set. Then we have Chromella, the Gosborth Thief. It's a 4 mana. It's a 4 mana 2/4 that we can tap for 1 and tap it, and we can make Grixis mana, 1 blue, 1 black, 1 red. We can spend this mana to cast instant or sorcery spells, and then when it dies, we get to bring up to 1 target instant or sorcery spell from our graveyard to your hand, so you can use it to cast a charm, and then it dies, you can get the charm back and kind of repeat again. So definitely interesting card to mess around with. We went with 3 copies of it because it is legendary. And then we have the last card in the deck is Evelyn of the Covetous. It's a 5 mana 2/5 of flash. Whenever her or another vampire enters the battlefield under our control, we exile the top card of each player's library with a collection counter on it. Once a turn, you may play a card in exile with a collection counter on it as though exiled by the ability you control, and you may spend mana as though a mana in a color. So it has like one of those abilities that it's like you exile top card of your library. It's kind of like the Tibble effect, where Tibble draws card from, or exiles the top card of each player's library. You guess the card with as though the mana value of any mana. Get your opponent's lands, get your opponent's creatures, use your opponent's spells against your opponent, make your opponent frustrated that way. And the idea is that the ability triggers whenever she or another vampire comes in the battlefield. So we do have, that's why we have a couple of the cheaper vampires in the deck, because we want to try to trigger this ability as much as possible. And to be quite honest, it doesn't seem, I guess if she leaves the battlefield, you can't do the ability, but yet again, I'm not sure. I know Tibble, you get technically an emblem. Those cards are usable all the time. I don't know if her secondary ability, if this ability is kind of like that, or if once she leaves the battlefield, those cards are exiled until you play another one. I don't know. It's yet again something to kind of see how it plays out, but definitely a very interesting card to kind of mess around with in this kind of style of deck, and kind of try to get that cheap win using your opponent's creatures. And then the mana base, yet again 24 lands. We have 3 copies of the Bloodfall Caves, 2 copies of Dismal Blackwater, 4 islands, 3 theaters. We have 5 mountains, and we also have 5 swamps, and we have 2 Swiftwater Cliffs. And the mana breakdown is kind of like a little bit on the heavier on the black side, then red, and then a little splash of blue in certain cards. There's nothing like that's just blue in cost. So yet again, definitely an interesting vampire deck. I don't know, is this where vampires could go in the future? I don't know. But guys, if you like any of the decks, all the links will be down in the description below that you can check out and import into Arena and kind of mess around with and kind of, play them out and kind of see what you like. If you're new here, you want to know when I post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button. But that being said, I'll see you in the next video.